Hello everyone, this is experiment 9, series resonant circuits. Let's begin with part 1, low Q circuit. First of all, we need to measure the real value of the 220 ohm resistor, and as you can see on the ohm meter screen, it comes out to be 223 ohms. Next, we measure the resistance of the coil, inductor coil, and it comes out to be 107.2 ohms. Now we construct the circuit of figure 9.3. We set the oscillator to 500 Hz and 8 volts peak to peak. And on channel 2 of the oscilloscope, we display the voltage across the capacitor, and it comes out to be 8 volts peak to peak for 500 Hz. Next, we set the oscillator to 1000 Hz and 8 volts peak to peak on channel 1 of the oscilloscope. Here on the dual channel mode of the oscilloscope, you can clearly see the input voltage and the capacitor voltage side by side. And VC peak to peak is again measured to be 8 volts for 1000 Hz. Here for 2000 Hz, we display both the input signal and VC. The one on the left corresponds to the input signal, and the one on the right is VC. And VC peak to peak is again 8 volts. For 3000 Hz, VC peak to peak is measured to be 8.4 volts. VC peak to peak for 4000 Hz is again 8.4 volts. For 5 kHz, VC peak to peak is measured to be 8 volts. VC peak to peak for 6000 Hz is measured to be 7 volts. VC peak to peak for 7000 Hz is measured to be 6 volts. For 8 kHz, VC peak to peak comes out to be 4.8 volts. For 9 kHz, VC peak to peak is measured to be 3.8 volts. For 10 kHz, VC peak to peak is 3.1 volts. For 5500 Hz, VC peak to peak is 7.8 volts. For 4500 Hz, VC peak to peak is 8.2 volts. For 4200 Hz, VC peak to peak is 8.1. And for 5200 Hz, VC peak to peak is 7.9. Now we interchange the positions of the capacitor and inductor. For 500 Hz, VL peak to peak is measured to be 250 millivolts. For 1 kHz, VL peak to peak is measured to be 540 millivolts. For 2 kHz, VL peak to peak is measured to be 1.4 volts. For 3 kHz, VL peak to peak is 2.5 volts. For 4 kHz, VL peak to peak is 4.4 volts. 5 kHz input voltage gives us a VL peak to peak value of 6.2 volts. 6 kHz input voltage results in VL peak to peak of 7.6 volts. 7 kHz gives us VL peak to peak 8.8 volts. 8 kHz results in 9.2 volts VL peak to peak. 9 kHz results in VL peak to peak of 9 volts. For 10 kHz, VL peak to peak is again 9 volts. For 5500 Hz, VL peak to peak is measured to be 6.6 volts. 4500 Hz gives us VL peak to peak value of 5 volts. 4200 Hz gives us 4.8 volts VL peak to peak. 5200 Hz gives us a 6.4 volts VL peak to peak value. Now we interchange the positions of the inductor and resistor and take the VR readings. For 500 Hz, VR peak to peak is 0.5 volts. For 1 kHz, VR peak to peak is measured to be 1 volts. For 2 kHz, VR peak to peak is measured to be 2 volts. For 3 kHz, VR peak to peak is 3 volts. For 4 kHz, VR peak to peak is 3.8 volts. For 5 kHz, VR peak to peak is 4.4 volts. Note that the input and the VR is more or less in phase here. For 6 kHz, VR peak to peak is measured to be 4.6 volts. For 7 kHz, VR peak to peak is again 4.4 volts. For 8 kHz, VR peak to peak is measured to be 4.2 volts. For 9 kHz, VR peak to peak is 4 volts. For 10 kHz, VR peak to peak is 3.6 volts. For 5500 Hz, VR peak to peak is 4.5 volts. For 4500 Hz, VR peak to peak is 4 volts. For 4200 Hz, VR peak to peak is 3.9 volts. For 5200 Hz, VR peak to peak is 4.5 volts. Okay, this is the data pertaining to the table 9.1. In this experiment, you are going to only be responsible for part 1, and this concludes our experiment. Thank you for watching.